Welcome to this second video from our June 2023 symposium, First Line of Defense. We'll hear from a panel of the leading innovators of whole health learning and practices whose work has touched students in many thousands of American schools. They'll report on the impact of mindfulness, children's time in nature, the school garden, teaching kitchens, and cognition bolstering exercise and nutrition science. It is their collective outcomes over the years that has given rise to the idea that we have a first line of defense to call on. I want to move now to a panel consisting of folks who've been at this work of improving kids' well-being and health through the set of what we call whole health learning programs. Each one is a unique and discrete profession in and of itself. And we want to start with Laura Bakosh, who is a founder and principal at Explore, who's had tremendous experience in delivering mindful programs and practices into the schools around the country. So if you could begin Laura's presentation. Nice to have you, Laura. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Taylor. And I will build on Dr. Rosen's comments because they are so pertinent to what has to happen next. So next slide. At InterExplorer, we're an organization that really focuses on that upstream prevention because we do recognize that as we work to try to support the downstream issues that have been developing, it's much harder to do as an intervention, much easier to do as a prevention approach. So I won't belabor these because we just did discuss them all, but the situation in our schools and in our communities for our children is catastrophic. There's no other way to say it. And I'm just grateful that this group here today is talking about these issues and really trying to elevate. So next slide. The main thing that we really focus on from the standpoint of mindfulness is that the list that Dr. Rosen showed, including ACEs, have a foundational issue with how stress influences the brain's development from very early ages. So we have children in school who are highly stressed in a chronic environment. Those stressors, are all based on the list that we show with climate change and political divisiveness and so on. But stress actually hinders brain development. And when we think about kids who are exposed to these kinds of stressors without a way to attenuate the stress, they actually are left with fewer and fewer cognitive resources to progress through their lives. So they get blocked, anxious, depressed, a category of disorders known as diseases of despair, including addiction and suicide ideation. So these things are happening to kids' brains, and there is nothing that's being done to really effectively attenuate it. So the next slide, the reason that people are so excited about mindfulness is because mindfulness is proven to attenuate stress in the brain and body. It's proven to downregulate the fight or flight reactivity that kids experience, and it's proven to grow healthy brain connections in the parts of the brain associated with learning. So that is critical for their future. It's critical for how they do in school and obviously what happens next in life. What people don't understand about mindfulness is that it's a daily practice, much like teeth brushing. So you don't do mindfulness for 6 weeks and then you're done. You do mindfulness a little bit every day, just like teeth brushing, and it consistently attenuates the overwhelm of stress that is part of our lives, unfortunately. And when you do that every day, a lot of remarkable things happen. Next slide. So this is part of the category called whole health learning. So other speakers will be talking about some of these other parts, but in the mindfulness space, it's literally 5 or 10 minutes a day. It's audio guided. It's shipped into classrooms and after school programs and early learning programs, wherever kids are. And it's really simple to operate. And it's just one pathway. There's lots of other ways to be mindful. And there's lots of other programs within this whole health framework. And so this is just a piece of that overall puzzle. Next slide.
We're just going to have ourselves a little mini practice. Allowing your eyes to gently close or to look downward. You probably know research indicates that practicing gratitude can extend how long you actually live, which means you're going to live longer if you show a lot more gratitude. Let's get straight into it. Breathing in, breathing out. And again, breathing in, breathing out. Tune to the breath and placing your attention on what you're thankful for. Maybe small things like watching a bird fly by or sunset.
And you can stop the video now just for
That's the teacher
the sake of time.
who gave you a compliment.
So there's an entire film crew in front of this classroom, and you can see the peacefulness and the settling that these kids in downtown Detroit are going through. So this is kind of the application, if you will. And as I said, this is kind of one component of a whole health approach. But we really talk about mindfulness as to mental health, what teeth brushing is to dental health. It attenuates stress, it improves cognition, and it improves outcomes. So it's simple. 5 or 10 minutes a day. It's a press of a button. There's a ton of evidence that shows there's less stress, less behavior problems, and better academic performance, because we know when kids are less stressed and better able to focus, they actually do better in school. We are in 3,500 schools across the country, serving more than 2.5 million children today, but there are 60 million kids in the preschool through high school grouping. So we have quite a long way to go, but we're working at it as a reasonably small nonprofit. And then the other thing that really matters to school districts and to after school organizations is that it's affordable and sustainable. So it's less than $5 a student for a year. As we saw from Dr. Rosen's chart, we're spending a lot of money and we are not getting good outcomes in academics and in mental health and in physical health. This is a fantastic solution in order to do that better. And then last slide. So this is what happens when we do this consistently. This is a school in Tampa. 80% of these kids are homeless. This is a Title I high poverty school in downtown Tampa. They've been doing this type of practice every day for 5 years. And you can see the results are unmistakable. These children would have been F students, and God knows what would have happened at the end of their school years. But instead, they're performing at A levels. They're emerging into the human beings that they are meant to be. And it's because we're removing the barriers to their exceptionalism by reducing stress and helping their brain develop in the healthiest ways possible. So that is the summary. And we're just really excited to be a part of this group bringing these kinds of tools forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. I don't know how many people here realize that you've been working with 3,500 schools across the country. I certainly wasn't. And I think that part of what we're trying to do is raise the awareness of the work and depth and spread of your work and others in these fields as a matter of encouraging additional attention to all of this. So we want to go now to Cathy Jordan, who is the director of research at Children and Nature Network. The network has been with us since June 18th, 5 years ago, I'm happy to say, and Cathy has been a great participant in a variety of our various webinars, and I'm delighted that she's been able to spring free and join us today. Cathy, why don't you take it away?
Sure. Thanks, Taylor. You can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to be talking with you about the benefits of nature, direct engagement in nature, as well as just exposure to nature, which sometimes we just call greenery. So exposure to nature and direct engagement with nature benefits cognitive health and development, emotional or mental health, and social emotional learning. And I'm among other things. And I'm going to give you some high-level conclusions from the research in these three areas. But due to time, I'm not going to be reviewing any really specific studies contributing to these conclusions, except in one case, because there's a study that I just really love. So we're going to talk first about that cognitive health domain. You can go to the next slide, please. One benefit is the ability to concentrate better during or after time in nature. This finding is thought to be related to nature's impact on recovery from what we call attentional fatigue. Basically, the attention restoration theory says that there are two components to attention, directed or effortful attention, like when kids are doing schoolwork or taking a test or doing homework. And the second is non-directed or involuntary attention, where attention is just sort of captured by interesting things without really taxing concentration. So voluntary directed attention is a finite resource. It gets depleted, our brains get tired after spending time concentrating, and we lose focus. Attention restoration theory suggests that contact with nature taps that involuntary, effortless attention system, allowing the directed voluntary system time to rest, leading to attention restoration or replenishment. You can go to the next slide. Now, in contrast to attention, which tends to be a temporary state, intelligence is more stable. But we used to think that intelligence was something you were just sort of born with it. You have an innate level, and that's kind of what you got for the rest of your life. But now we have research that suggests that there are any number of aspects of the environment that certainly affect intelligence and IQ test performance in both good and bad ways. It's just a slower process over time, not a momentary state like attention. Intelligence as an outcome that might be able to be impacted by nature and greenery is a relatively new area of interest, and the research is mostly about greenery around children's homes rather than school, but that residential greenery evidence for higher IQ scores in particularly urban children living near more greenery could, I think, generalize to the greenery around schools, as schools are another environment in which students are spending many, many hours of their childhoods. And the more children are learning outdoors, not just greenery around their school, but learning outdoors surrounded by greenery, the more likely that exposure to greenery during the school day would enhance IQ. Next slide. Now, it's one thing to think about nature exposure supporting kids' performance on IQ tests, which, as we said, are relatively more stable than attention. But it's another thing to think about nature being so powerful that it actually changes the brain structure as it develops. Next slide. But that can indeed happen. There's research to suggest that the more greenery, again, around children's homes, the bigger the brain in certain areas that tend to be associated with performance on things like memory and attention. Again, this isn't schoolyard greenery, but I think there could be implications for greening schoolyards, as I mentioned earlier. So nature really can build a better brain. Next slide, please. Let's move on to the emotional functioning and mental health domain. As we've been talking about, we know students have taken a big hit on their mental health as a result of the COVID pandemic. We need to intervene to make school a place that supports mental health and resilience, as well as the cognitive functions we've talked about, like attention, that support learning. So studies generally find that contact with nature supports positive mood, reduces symptoms of depression, and generally makes kids more calm and relaxed. For kids, school can be taxing, it can be stressful, and too much stress makes it hard to pay attention and hard to learn and remember what you learned. So what can we do to support kids' ability to cope with stress or to make school less stressful? Next slide. One way is to do more teaching outdoors, making use of nature to teach across a range of academic subjects. There was a study, this is the one study that I'm going to sort of go into a little bit more detail about because I think it's quite illustrative. There's a study in Norway that looked at two groups of these were later elementary students, they were sort of preteens. One group spent a day a week throughout the year kind of doing school in a forest setting, or we could call that forced school. The other group remained in their classroom for the entire academic year. The researchers took saliva samples in both groups over the course of the morning that the forest school was in session outdoors. And they did this during the fall, the spring, and the summer. And they tested the saliva for cortisol, which is a marker of the body's stress reactivity. A healthy daily pattern of cortisol would be that it would start a little high in the morning, and over the course of the morning to early afternoon, it would decline. Next slide, please. When they compared the daily pattern for the children who remained in the classroom, which was the control group, which is shown on the left in this graphic, with that of the kids who were in the forest school, the intervention group, shown on the right, they found that the forest school seemed to support a healthy stress physiology system, showing that kind of healthy diurnal drop over the course of the morning. That classroom-based learning group seemed to produce a chronically higher level of stress, and it didn't show that normal healthy decrease over the course of the morning. We know that chronically elevated levels of stress can interfere with learning, and it looks like that is more likely to happen for kids who don't have opportunities to learn outdoors. Next slide. Okay, finally, we're going to talk about social emotional learning. We often call this SEL. Next slide, please. SEL is the process of acquiring and effectively applying the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. And you can see here that there are aspects of this that are about self-knowledge and self-regulation. There are aspects that are about understanding and interacting well with others. And there are cognitive aspects about sound decision-making. SEL can be promoted in a variety of settings, but nature provides, I think, a somewhat unique setting, particularly when young people are engaging in more challenging, appropriately risky nature-based activities, and when they are doing that together in a more collaborative or social environment. We see this from the youngest ages on up. In young kids, it might be, helping each other cross a stream by walking on logs or rocks, all the way up to adolescents who are engaging in wilderness adventure. It's just whatever is developmentally appropriate that is that challenge and that developmentally appropriate risk. A lot of research suggests that both the natural environment and the social situation present the child with challenges and sometimes risks that they need to figure out how to handle. They get the opportunity to test their mettle. They learn their limits, and they make sound decisions about what they can and can't do based on understanding about themselves and each other and the context or the environment that they're in. They get to practice communication, conflict management, collaboration, leadership and followership skills. They learn how to manage frustration when things don't go the way that they planned or don't work out the way that they wanted. And they learn to have empathy and learn how to support each other when, let's say, a peer is struggling or has different skills than they do. Next slide. This is the final slide. So to pull this all together, in summary, nature exposure and nature direct engagement can benefit kids' functioning and school outcomes through improving cognitive function like attention and memory and even intelligence, emotional functioning and mental health like positive mood and decreased stress, and the opportunity to practice social emotional learning skills, including self-knowledge and self-regulation, understanding and interacting well with others, and sound decision-making. The research also suggests that these benefits are the result of both the nature itself, the green, but are also partly due to the pedagogy. Learning in context is just more engaging. Learning in nature tends to pull for more active, collaborative, inquiry-based forms of learning. And these can certainly happen in a classroom as well, but nature is particularly well suited for these sorts of high impact teaching and learning approaches. And to pull the information forward that Laura presented about mindfulness, nature is also a place where mindful approaches can really be done with great benefit, and nature exposure in school and its benefits can be deepened through a mindfulness approach in nature. And I would say the reverse is true as well. Doing mindfulness in nature really benefits the outcomes of mindfulness approaches. And I haven't even touched on some of the other benefits, like being more physically active in nature. That is a topic for another session coming up at the end of these short presentations. This all highlights that even though Taylor talked about these presentations as representing distinct fields or disciplines, they are interconnected, they are complementary, and sometimes overlapping. And that suggests that sometimes a single intervention can achieve multiple goals because they really can be done in concert. And that creates I think just a synergy that leads to higher impact. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cathy. And, you know, you're certainly right about my efforts to try to focus on these individual fields or domains. I had a hard time trying to figure out what do they all belong to? What is the overarching term? And I don't think there is one. But for us, I think everybody individually in whatever facet of this is undertaking, you know, work. It's, to my mind, it's all to strengthen children's well-being and resilience during their school years, which is what everyone, I think, is really undertaking when they go through this. So next, I want to introduce Nathan Larson, who has been a very active guy in school gardens, particularly in the state of Wisconsin, which has last I counted, 800 school gardens in the network that Nathan was instrumental in helping to establish, that were aligned in part with the University of Wisconsin. And I think the connections there at Wisconsin are very, very interesting. The Center for Healthy Minds is part of the university, and Nathan himself can tell a little bit more about his work with regenerative natural work. So Nathan, welcome. Thanks for being here, and thanks for being along for this ride.
Thanks, Taylor. Thanks, everyone. Great to be here. So I think, you know, we're getting a sense that there are a lot of, in the face of this crisis, there are a lot of positive activities, programs, places that can really improve and support the health and well-being of children and adults as well. School gardens is one of those places, and I'll relate school gardens a little bit to some of the other topics that we'll be discussing today or have discussed already. And also thinking about, you know, there's a growing evidence base, I think, that's been communicated really well. And that's both evidence-based practice, so through research, as well as practice-based evidence through the work of colleagues around the world, you know, over time, seeing this in action. And so I'm going to touch on some of that today, share some stories that just illustrate some of the principles at play that seem to be really successful, as well as just some of the evidence that we see out there. So we can go ahead to the next slide. I should mention the photos in this presentation mostly come from two programs in Madison that I've been involved in the last 20 years. One is the Troy Kids Garden, and the other one is the Goodman Youth Farm. And those are both collaborations with the school district. They're regional and community partners, so they're regional school and community youth gardens. And all the quotes are from children spending time in those gardens, just kind of quotes overheard as children move through these spaces. So, you know, I think this slide gets at some of the pieces. This is a child climbing a mulberry tree, eating fresh mulberries. And you can imagine the physical activity. I remember one quote I heard a child say one time that I like climbing trees. What did they say? I like climbing trees, it makes me think, or something like that, just sort of demonstrating they were reflecting on how they had to really think about, you know, moving up through the branches. Obviously, it's fun, the physical activity, the sensory engagement, and then also that sense of connection. So we can go to the next slide. So I think this is another piece, in addition to the mindfulness in nature, the attention restoration that happens in the garden, the physical activity, the connection to food, connection to nature. It's also this sense of place and sense of belonging, which I think, I feel like there's more and more interesting emphasis on sense of belonging, how important that is. And it's, these are community spaces. So these gardens are grown and tended by children together, children and educators. And so you have this intergenerational environment, mentorship, and so forth, as well as the connection to plants and animals. So it's, it's not just the human community, but there's a larger natural community. And I think that's something I've definitely seen over the years, working with thousands of gardens around the world. That's a huge part of that sense of that kind of mental health and well-being, supporting those pieces. So we can go to the next slide. And sometimes it's that place to just have a quiet place. So one of the courses I teach at UW-Madison is it's mindfulness and restorative environments, and it's a co-design. So it's students in the planning and landscape architecture department, and we co-design restorative environments with children at one of the elementary schools in Madison. And so children will often talk about both like places that, I feel joyful here, or this place makes me feel happy, or I feel calm, and how it's like this continuum of both a calmness, but also like sort of enthusiasm. There's a lot of excitement as well. But I just love this photograph. I think captures that just kind of quiet place to sit and hang out with with one of the resident chickens in the garden. Next slide. Also, just that concept of letting the garden be the teacher. I think some of that's been talked about already, but that idea of that self-directed, self-guided is so important. Children live. I think another piece of what can be difficult is children live in environments, where there's a lot of rules and, the desk you sit in, or even the sidewalks you walk on, or the halls you walk down. It's very kind of, not a lot of movement to just move around, meander. And so in a garden, you can meander, and you can move across uneven terrain, and you can go where, maybe you see a bumblebee over here, or a hawk flies overhead, or you're going to visit the chicken, or, those kinds of things. So that's so important. Next slide. Again, to the hands-on experiential, right? So it's self-guided. It's you're experiencing this world, and the sensory aspect is huge as well. Also, that sense of self-efficacy, collective efficacy that happens in the garden. This is a story. I'll just share a quick story. That these I don't know how many folks on the call have pulled out Brussels sprouts before, but if you have, it's quite a bit of work. It's like little trees. And this was one of the sites where a group of young children, initially it was sort of, the idea was that maybe some of the teens in the program would be taking this task on. And in the end, it was a group of young children where they're running out, and they would all grab on the Brussels sprouts and muscle these out of the ground and tumble down into the ground and laughing. And for some of these kids, it was like they're in the Brussels sprouts. It's like they really are in the forest, which is another important thing, is that sense of immersiveness, that you don't have to be in a big plot of land to feel immersed in nature. If you're in a Brussels sprout or a raspberry patch, even if there's like roads nearby or other parts of the city, you can feel that sense of you're in among the plants, and that world kind of recedes away. That's, I think, really another important piece. Of course, I touched on this already, the gardening community, and that's also the generational, and that's a lot of fun, right? And that connectivity. Next. Cultivating a sense of wonder. This quote comes from one of the sites has chickens, as you might have seen or gathered. The Troy Kids Garden has chickens on site. The youth farm has a beekeeping program. And so there's a lot of interesting, I won't talk about that too much in too much detail, but there's some interesting stories that youth have talked about, just sort of the buzz of the hive and just sort of how that's calming. But kids love the chickens. If you could go back, sorry, I was just going to share this quote. And so we would have an egg lottery, and kids would get to go and get a chicken or the egg. And so that's where this quote came from, just realizing, like, oh, that's why it's warm. So that discovery, right? Okay, next slide. Yeah, and also, like, I think a lot of interesting scholarship and attention to everyday awe. This idea of awe can happen all the time, and in a natural environment, in a school garden, enormous sunflowers, things like that can be a big part of that. All right, so just, well, why don't we, so multisensory, connecting with food, we can just keep going through. I'll just go really quickly. Growing food, preparing food. The physical, even, teachers can hop on and make pesto or salsa in the bike blender. The way food comes together. Yep, let's go ahead. It's fun. Gathering, eating together. Thank you. So it's the National School Garden Support Organization Network and Wisconsin School Garden Network. If just those two sites, if you want to learn more about some of these, and you can find my contact information on both those sites. Thanks.
Thank you much, Nathan. And I just wanted to note that he mentioned at the end there, the School Garden Support Organization has become further developed. Last April 2022, somehow he managed to get 400 people come to Denver area for a first conference for what has been a collegial, organization, everybody around the country. I thought getting 400 folks who are mostly working at schools and gardens was a pretty cool achievement. Anyway, thanks, Nathan. Next, I want to introduce Marion Williams of Wellness in the Schools, whose organization has been a partner with us since the very beginning, and Nancy Easton came to be part of us at the first inaugural at Georgetown 2018. Marion, why don't you introduce yourself just a minute and take it away? Thanks.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be here and represent Wellness in the Schools, and even on a larger basis, represent Nancy Easton, who I've been asked to, I'm honored to present for her our program. I just want to say, just wondering, have you thought about where you were years ago? I think to Dr. Rosen's point, as this has been going on for so long. In 2005, can you remember where you were? I can tell you where Nancy Easton was. She was thinking about children. As a mentor, as a teacher, and a school leader for 15 years, she was thinking about children and their health, thinking about where their minds were and how they thought on a daily basis, trying to put together a program that could support these children that she worked with on a daily basis, bringing together friends and other interested parents to put together Wellness in the Schools. That's when Wellness in the Schools launched in 2005. So I think Nancy can always remember that year for herself. Bringing healthy bodies, nourished minds, fresh food to the lunch plates of the schools was the beginning of Wellness in the Schools initiative. What our mission is to make sure that children have the opportunity to learn and live better through healthy food. And so to be asked to speak about the teaching programs that we do in the kitchens is so important to understand how the support of that work would then expand through all schools. Our executive chef is Bill Telpan. He came through and brought recipes and helped develop lab programs that I could tell you, Ms. Felice can tell you a little bit about. The Lakeside schools got an opportunity to experience. That program alone is one of the largest ways that we impact our students. And so that was Nancy's why, seeing students that she knew needed to get more health in their bodies in order for their minds to thrive. You can go to the next slide. And my why, my own personal why. As a chef in 2005, listening to the CNN and other programs elevating the terrible level of health for New Yorkers, specifically for myself from the Bronx, and also for United States in general, was really the pivotal part for my own change in journey as a chef. Had been a chef for 15 years prior to that time, and decided to change my own health and change my own focus, and went back to school to learn about health supportive cooking and bring that into the schools. I was asked to volunteer for wellness in the schools, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. You can go to the next slide. Here, you see a group of cooks. These are the people. This is the community that surrounds the children that we're talking about. And this community, we say that it takes a village to raise children. This is the beginning of where the raising happens. And one of the reasons, because most of our children get most of their nutritious meals during the school day. 3 meals a day, sometimes 4 in certain communities, snacks included, happen in a school. So bringing cook camp workshops to those schools is one of the most important things we can do. Supporting the people that feed our children. Understanding the school cooks are the aunties, they're the uncles, they're the grandmas that of the community that work in those schools for many, many years. Immigrants themselves, it's one of the places that they can actually get benefits for themselves. It's a day that they can work that allows them to have time to go home and support their children. These cook camps in the different districts, we put together based on the district's needs. We collaborate with the district so we can see where are they right at this moment? How can they make change to go to scratch cooking? That's where our initiative is going, in order to make sure that we can impact those diseases that begin in childhood that can cause children to have these obesity-related diseases that we're trying to fight as they get older. You can go to the next slide. Looking at these people in the kitchen, looking at the food, the fresh fruits and vegetables that we work with. We have our chefs go into the schools. They make a relationship with that kitchen. We bring them to a culinary location, a lot different from what they have in their own environment. We're bringing them out of that environment to refresh them, to make them feel important, in order for them to understand that they are essential workers and they are the people that have fed us. They fed us through the pandemic, and they feed us on a regular basis of through any emergency that we have. We give them skills to make them understand exactly how important what they do every day means to these children. You can go to the next slide. Here, self-care is also important for these workers. They stand up all day, they get short breaks, but how do they revitalize themselves during those breaks? This self-care translates to the school service line, because if they feel good, they can translate that to the children. That goes to mindfulness. If we don't feel good, the children can feel it. We know that they're really intuitive to how our day's going. So we make sure that these essential workers get an opportunity to see that a quick stretch break can make them feel good and can actually revitalize them. You can go to the next slide. The other part of this work is to take it to the classroom. What we teach in that kitchen then goes to the classroom through our cooking labs. Our cooking labs are where we show children the difference between an apple and a peach. Many times I go into schools and they can't tell the difference, because many times they see a cut apple or peach, or packaged apple or peach, or canned. They don't see the whole vegetable. Thank you, Nathan, for the work that you do. Because taking the children out into nature and showing them where it is so important. But teaching them in the classroom how we make it in the kitchen also teaches them to impact fresh food, to try something new and not be afraid to understand where it's come from. You can go to the next. We teach children how to impact food they know regularly. So apples seem fairly simple, but if you core them out and you fill them with spices and other fruits and you change the flavors, that's how we impact children. And the impact that we have in New York right now is through our initiative with the mayor and with the new chancellor to impact 1,200 schools in New York City. We're putting 60 chefs in those schools, and we're expecting to get in the kitchens and get the voice of the child through 100 recipes that were created by our Chefs Council. These are celebrity chefs that have come to bring culturally relevant plant-based recipes to the New York City schools. This is going to be ground impacting. We're so excited about it after all of these years, just trying to get fresh fruit and vegetables to these children and being able to see that they see a baked apple as something a little bit different. We can change the spices. It gives them an opportunity to try something new. That's what we're trying to do with this new program. We're really excited about it. We've already piloted this year. We have 7 great recipes that are coming out. And those recipes are coming from African chefs. Those recipes are coming from Indian chefs. They're coming from Asian chefs. That's the world that our children see every day, especially in our communities. There are many other cultures other than the American. We've spoken about the American diet. We want to bring the Mediterranean flavors into our kitchen. We want to bring flavors of children, of their ancestors to them. And that's what this program is going to do. In addition to this, that really impacts the program is also getting together these leaders across the school food realm throughout the United States. And Nancy Easton and other leaders have created Scratchworks in order to get that work talking about how can scratch relevant food be brought into the kitchen, least processed foods. How can we do it? Once again, this is how we impact our students. We bring them the fresh fruits, the fresh vegetables. We show them the differences. Here you go. We have them smell, taste, and play with them. And then we teach them juicy chef words. And that's where their voice comes through. And that's one of the things that we have found, and this is my last point, but really important to elevate Dr. Rosen, to let you know, these are our high school students learning how to make their own salads, understanding my plate, understanding how to put it into act. And giving a child a voice also helps them feel a little bit better about themselves. So I wanted to leave you with that and just understand that we are so excited. And thank you, Whole Health and the Harkin Institute, for allowing wellness in the schools to come.
Great. Thank you, Marion, so much. What you and your colleagues are doing across New York City and in other places, even in a tiny village like Millville 4 years ago, was fantastic. And I really appreciate your participation here. What a move to introduce Jen Sacheck at the George Washington University, the Milken Institute of Public Health, who has also been with us on many occasions to go visit the NIH and do other efforts to introduce this whole idea of a combined reinforcing group of activities that kids are engaged in and should be engaged in on a much more routine basis. Jen, feel free to take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thanks for having me today. And I'll be very mindful of the time and offering my perspective from the lens of the physical activity lens per se. And hopefully this first slide here sort of encapsulates, I think, what has been talked about already, how physical activity is also a component of many of our, sort of disciplines, but really how we're really cross-disciplinary and integrated. Next slide, please. So again, speaking from the perspective of physical activity, and I think this was really introduced well by Dr. Rosen and others, that a lot of us came into this field of work really by engaging with, whether it's mindfulness, nutrition, sleep, physical activity, and how this impacts health of kids. And my lens has always been a preventative lens, and really starting with the obesity epidemic and really physical health and long-term health outcomes, and sort of on the right, those blue boxes. But really over the years, seeing the shift towards the health and well-being of children and the mental health, cognitive health, And of course, today that really encapsulates stress, anxiety, social emotional learning, and how physical activity plays such a central role in this. And I'm saying it's not the only thing, but how I'm taking this lens today. But also to be really mindful too of, on the far left, that the physical and social environments these children are in play a huge role. And I specifically focus on at-risk children and youth, typically lower income, urban communities, which can be very different than other communities or even rural, like access to gardens, et cetera. So how we think about the environment is also really important. Next slide, please. And I do spend a lot of time thinking about how much children move and how this impacts health. And that's what I'm not going to talk about today. And hopefully this slide shows you can be very helpful in a lot of different, whether it's sedentary activity, lying down or sitting, not with a device, right? All the way up to really modern, vigorous activity that are really great for, energy balance and other like things like cardiovascular health, our brain. So just thinking about that dose of what our kids get and what are getting currently is of utmost concern. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot of something I've been doing over the years, but looking how kids move during their school days. I'm focusing here on this slide just on an average school day. This is in data collected in DC public schools in conjunction with the head of health and wellness there to really get a sense of how much kids are moving as they're trying to implement programs that improve movement of kids throughout the day, because we know it's so impactful on health and well-being. You can see that on the far left, already 18% of pre-K kids in DC public schools were not meeting the school time physical activity recommendation. And that's 60 minutes in this age group. And then once you get to first, third, and fifth grade, over on the right, their recommendation shifts to just 30 minutes during school time, right? But only 28% of these kids are meeting that recommendation. And you can see the precipitous decline from first to fifth grade, and knowing where stress and anxiety with the world and sort of devices and things that they're getting hit with social media, it's sort of hitting at this sort of critical crisis point in late elementary, middle school years. Next slide, please. And then if you think about movement and well-being of kids and thinking about active learning, something that I've done a lot with in my research, here's just really looking at, if you look at the average first grader, these are actually wearing research grade accelerometers. The most of the day is really sedentary time, right? They're not moving really at all. Doesn't even incorporate light movement. And it's just these little bursts during recess and PE where they might be moving. And we know that most kids in elementary school are not getting PE 5 days a week, right? So this is a day where they actually have PE. And then recess, sometimes they don't have it. They might not have access to the outdoors or limited time on a blacktop. So again, these little snippets are really hard to think about how this is going to improve the child if we want them to be moving more, to be feeling well and being healthy. Next slide, please. But critically, I do want to put out there that I feel strongly that physical activity, along with good nutrition, is brain food. And this is where we know how physical activity, like a lot of other things we've been talking about today, whether it's mindfulness and eating well, and being less stressed, is good for how kids do cognitively during the school day, and how that will in turn also impact their health and well-being. Next slide. And this is probably my favorite slide to show when I try to demonstrate how important movement time is for kids during the school day. And this would probably, was shown to be very similar with looking at how a kid's brain reacts during nature. But this is a randomized trial where kids were taking a test after sitting quietly for 20 minutes, or whether they took the test after a 20-minute walk. And, I'd love to think that it was a beautiful 20-minute walk in nature. But you can see here on the left that the brain activity taking this test is a lot lower than after a 20-minute walk. And I think we all know how great we feel after we've moved, after we have sort of the blood flowing and all the hormonal responses that are positive to make us feel really great about ourselves. And this doesn't have to be high intensity. This here is just an example of walking. Next slide. And how I've looked at this more in randomized controlled trials in terms of research settings is looking at how we do put really creatively into schools. And these are schools that may not have access to a lot of resources, where we put in active movement breaks. We put in sort of walking, running programs where kids can actually move and learn at the same time. And how this not only impacts, academic achievement and test scores, which we know means maybe one thing, but how this also impacts attendance and wanting to come to school because they're in an environment that's nurturing their health. But also how this improves self-efficacy, social emotional learning, and just overall feeling good and less stress and anxiety, depressive symptoms. And this is something we demonstrated in a flex trial, which actually put different randomized schools to different active classroom breaks or movement breaks compared to control schools, and could see these really robust differences over 2 years of time. So again, showing how important physical activity is for children's health and well-being. And next slide, and this will be my last one. And then really thinking even more so now how we partner with different organizations, such as some that have actually been presenting today, who are already working in schools, and how they really think about engaging with children. So that in this lens, again, is with physical activity. This was a project we did with Up to Us Sports, which is a national program that actually puts near peers into the schools to help provide activities for kids. Specifically, this is in New Orleans. This study occurred in middle school children who were, really again from low income communities. Those near peers going in and saying like, hey, I'm going to help promote, some basketball during recess time. I'm going to be there for if there's issues during class time to take kids out of class, if they need to get out and move around, to discuss, their life, their stress, to help with social emotional learning, and how basically it's like a model of sports-based youth development, where physical activity can actually move the needle on kids, well-being, anxiety, and stress, by giving them an outlet through movement. And I think that's a lot of what we've talked about today, is the outlets of nature, of movement, of being mindful and giving that space. And physical activity is a conduit, I'd say, for many of us, it is an opportunity to release stress, or it's a conduit for the ability to be mindful and just letting our brain go and not think for a while. And then if we're having different types of individuals support this, whether it's a teacher, a near peer, or just the students in the classroom, but the environment being conducive so that we can move and feel well. And I think that's one aspect that builds upon how well physical activity actually makes our bodies feel. Because if a children's body feels good, they are going to feel better. So I think it builds upon the physical health, the mental health, and again, really builds into that whole health child aspect that we're trying to promote today. So just my little aspect on the lens of physical activity in the little short amount of time that I had today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. Really appreciate it. And I appreciate everybody on the panel. And I hope we can all see that the through line that goes from the garden into the school kitchen and everything. Thank you for watching. Please be sure to check out the other videos from our First Line of Defense Symposium of June 2023, as well as the links to materials related to this video. See the links in the description below.